The emergency room doors slammed open at 04:17 a.m., and the entire trauma bay went silent. Two military police officers wheeled in a tactical crate, the kind designed for high-value canine transport, and the moment the latches were released, every medical professional in the room took an involuntary step backward. The dog inside did not growl, did not bark, did not lunge. He simply stood there, muscles locked, eyes scanning the room with the cold precision of a weapon that had been primed but not yet fired. Ghost. The name was stenciled on his tactical vest in faded letters, and beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, the Belgian Malinois looked exactly like his namesake, something that existed between worlds, refusing to fully occupy either. His fur was matted with dust from transport, his breathing shallow but controlled, and there was something wrong with his left rear leg that nobody could examine because nobody could get close enough to try. "No one gets near him," the senior MP announced, his voice carrying the particular tension of a man who had already witnessed what happened when someone ignored that warning. "Not even us." Dr. Klein, the base veterinarian with 23 years of experience treating military working dogs, studied Ghost from a safe distance of 8 feet. The dog's eyes tracked her movement with mechanical accuracy, calculating threat levels, measuring distances, waiting for someone to make a mistake. "What's his status?" she asked, without looking away from the animal. The handler didn't make it back. The MP's jaw tightened. Ghost was found at the extraction point, alone, wouldn't let anyone approach for 6 hours until they finally got him into the crate. The words settled over the room like a physical weight. The handler didn't make it back. In the vocabulary of military working dog units, those 5 words contained entire universes of grief. A canine and handler weren't just partners, they were a single organism divided into 2 bodies, each one's survival dependent on the other's presence. And now, half of that organism is gone. Chief Madsen, the senior corpsman who had been running the night shift, pushed forward with the confidence of someone who believed rank could solve any problem. "Prep the sedation kit. We stabilize first. We don't negotiate with..." Ghost's head snapped toward him. Not a growl, not a warning bark, just that laser-focused attention that said, "I see you. I've measured you. I know exactly how fast you can move and exactly how fast I can move faster." Madsen stopped mid-step. "Either we sedate," he said, forcing steel into his voice, "or we lose the treatment window." From the doorway came the sound of boots on linoleum, quiet footsteps, unhurried, belonging to someone who had learned long ago that running toward danger only made it harder to see clearly. Everyone turned. The young man standing at the threshold wore tactical gear still covered in dust from whatever transport had brought him here. No rank insignia visible, no name tape. Just a face that looked barely old enough to shave, and eyes that seemed to be processing information at a speed that didn't match his apparent inexperience. But Ghost's reaction was immediate. The dog's locked posture shifted, not relaxing, not welcoming, but changing. His head tilted 3 degrees to the left. His breathing pattern altered. For the first time since entering the room, Ghost's attention wasn't divided among multiple threats. It was focused entirely on the newcomer. "Who the hell are you?" Madsen demanded. "Hart." The young man's voice was quiet, measured. "Eli Hart, medic trainee." "A rookie?" Madsen's laugh carried genuine contempt. "Get out! This is a canine emergency response situation, not a training exercise." Eli didn't move. His eyes weren't on Madsen. They were on Ghost, tracking the subtle shifts in the dog's body language that everyone else had missed. The way Ghost's weight had redistributed slightly forward. The way his ears had rotated to capture Eli's voice frequency. The way his nostrils were flaring in short, rapid bursts, not searching for threat, but searching for something else entirely. "He's not fighting you," Eli said softly. "He's searching." "Searching for what? His handler's dead. There's nothing left to search for." "No." Eli took 1 step into the room. Ghost's muscles tensed, but he didn't react with aggression. "He's searching for confirmation, for proof that the world still makes sense." Dr. Klein frowned. There was something in the rookie's tone that didn't match his apparent lack of experience, a certainty that came from somewhere deeper than training manuals. "You have 30 seconds, she said, surprising herself. "Then we do it my way." Eli moved slowly, deliberately, keeping his hands visible at all times. He wasn't approaching Ghost directly. Instead, he was circling toward an angle that would put him in the dog's peripheral vision, the zone where threats were monitored but not prioritized. It was a technique that required intimate knowledge of canine psychology. It was not something they taught in basic medic training. "Look at his collar," Eli said, still not raising his voice above a conversational murmur. "The tactical clip on the left side. There's a D-ring with an attachment point." Dr. Klein squinted. The collar was standard military canine equipment, reinforced nylon with multiple attachment points for leads, cameras, and communication devices. But Eli was right. One of the D-rings was empty. Something had been removed or lost. What should be there? A talisman. Eli's voice caught slightly on the word. His handler would have carried something, a token, a marker, something that meant safe. When the canine saw it, he knew everything was under control. When it disappeared, he lost his reference point, Dr. Klein finished, understanding dawning. His entire safety framework collapsed. Madsen stepped forward again, patience exhausted. "This is ridiculous. We're not going to stand here listening to a rookie psychoanalyze a dog while—" The door behind them burst open. Lieutenant Commander Rourke strode into the room with the particular energy of someone who had been awakened from sleep and was determined to make everyone else pay for it. His uniform was immaculate despite the hour, his jaw set at an angle that suggested he had already decided someone was going to be punished for this disruption. "Who authorized this circus?" His gaze swept the room, cataloging every person present, assigning blame in real time. "I have a medical emergency in my sector, a canine that's apparently gone feral, and—" His eyes landed on Eli. "Who the hell are you?" "Hart, sir. Medic trainee." "A trainee?" Rourke's voice dripped with contempt. "And you're doing what exactly? Taking notes?" "He was trying to establish rapport with the canine," Dr. Klein interjected. "The dog seemed to respond to—" "The dog responded to nothing because the dog is an animal. And animals respond to authority, not to whatever feel-good nonsense this rookie is selling." Rourke pointed at Eli. "Step aside before you make this worse." Eli didn't move immediately. His eyes were still on Ghost, watching the dog's reaction to the raised voices, the aggressive body language, the shift in room dynamics. Ghost's posture had tightened again. Whatever fragile progress had been made was evaporating under the pressure of Rourke's presence. "Sir," Eli said carefully, "if I leave, he'll shut down completely. He's tracking me as his only stable reference point in the room." "His only stable?" Rourke laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Listen to me very carefully, trainee. This is a military working dog worth several $100,000. He is not tracking you as anything. He is an asset that needs to be stabilized and returned to operational status. Now step aside." Eli took one step backward. Ghost exploded. Not toward anyone. The dog was too well trained for that, but the reaction was unmistakable. His body went rigid, his breathing accelerated to rapid pants, and a low sound emerged from his throat that wasn't quite a growl but carried the same warning. Every person in the room froze. "He's anchoring on the rookie," Dr. Klein said, her voice tight. "Look at his tracking. He's not watching us anymore. He's only watching Hart." Rourke's face reddened. "That's impossible. Canines don't spontaneously bond with—" "Sir?" Eli's voice cut through the tension with surprising authority. "I have something that belongs to him." The room went silent. Eli's hand moved slowly toward his chest pocket. Every eye tracked the movement, Ghost's most intently of all. When Eli's fingers emerged holding a small metal chain, the fluorescent lights caught the surface and scattered reflections across the ceiling. Dog tags. Old ones. Worn. The edges smoothed by years of contact with skin and fabric. The kind that had traveled to places most people would never see, and returned carrying stories that could never be told. Ghost's entire body language transformed. The aggression drained away. The defensive posture softened. The dog's head tilted again. But this time there was something almost reverent in the movement, like a believer recognizing a sacred symbol they had thought lost forever. "My father wore these," Eli said quietly. "He was Ghost's handler." The words landed like artillery shells. Dr. Klein's hand flew to her mouth. Madsen's contempt shattered into confusion. Even Rourke, for all his bluster, seemed momentarily destabilized by the revelation. "Your father," Rourke repeated slowly, "was this dog's handler." "Yes, sir." "And you just happened to be on base when—" "I'm assigned here for training. I didn't know Ghost was being brought in tonight. I heard the commotion and—" Eli's voice caught slightly. "I recognized the transport crate. My father used to send me pictures. Ghost had begun moving, not rushing, not charging, moving with the deliberate care of a creature approaching something it desperately wanted but feared might disappear. Each step brought him closer to Eli, closer to the dog tags that hung from Eli's extended hand. "Nobody moves," Dr. Klein whispered. The room became a tableau. Medical equipment hummed, air circulation systems breathed. Outside, the pre-dawn darkness pressed against windows that had witnessed 1,000 emergencies, but nothing quite like this. A ghost reaching for a ghost, separated by 18 inches of charged air. Ghost's nose touched the metal. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. The dog inhaled, processing scent molecules that carried information no human could decode. Memories of missions, of training sessions, of quiet moments in kennels when the world outside ceased to exist. Then Ghost's eyes lifted from the tags to Eli's face, and something passed between them that transcended species. Recognition. Not of Eli himself, but of what Eli carried, the scent embedded in the metal, the echo of a voice that had once meant safety, now translated through genetic similarity and emotional resonance into something the dog could almost grasp. "He taught Ghost to trust one sound," Eli said, his voice barely above a whisper. "One set of tags. When everything else went wrong, when the world became chaos, Ghost was supposed to find these and know that someone was coming, that he wasn't abandoned." Rourke's jaw worked silently. "Prove it, now!" Eli lifted the dog tag slightly, letting them catch the light. The chain clinked softly, a small sound, almost imperceptible, but Ghost's ears rotated toward it with laser precision. It was a Pavlovian response, hardwired through thousands of training repetitions until the sound itself became a form of language. "Easy, Ghost." Eli lowered himself slowly, reducing his height to something less threatening. "I'm family." The dog's next movement broke every protocol in the room. Ghost stepped forward, not commanded, not coerced, not sedated into compliance, and placed his paw on the edge of the examination table. Then he leaned his weight toward Eli, closing the remaining distance until his head was inches from the young medic's chest. It was surrender. It was acceptance. It was a creature who had been screaming into the void, finally hearing an answer. "Nobody moves," Dr. Klein repeated, but this time her voice carried wonder instead of warning. "Nobody breathes." Eli's free hand came up slowly, hovering near Ghost's neck without touching. The dog's eyes tracked the movement but didn't flinch. Then, with the infinite care of someone diffusing an explosive, Eli's fingers made contact. Ghost exhaled. It was the first relaxed breath the dog had taken since his handler failed to return. The first moment in what might have been days when his body wasn't coiled for combat or flight. The tension drained from his muscles in visible waves, and he leaned more heavily against Eli's chest, seeking warmth and contact and the fundamental reassurance that he was not alone. "He won't take help from anyone else," Eli said, looking up at Dr. Klein. "Not tonight. Maybe not for a long time." "That's not how this works," Madsen interjected, finding his voice. "We have protocols, procedures. You can't just—" "Then you're in," Dr. Klein interrupted, her decision made. "Hart, you're staying. You're going to be his anchor while we work. You don't move, you don't leave, you don't take your hands off him unless I tell you to. Understood?" "Understood." "Dr. Klein," Rourke started, "with respect, Commander, I'm the veterinary authority here. This dog needs treatment, and this young man is the only thing standing between successful intervention and complete shutdown. Unless you want to explain to Command why a decorated military working dog died because we prioritize procedure over pragmatism, I suggest you let me do my job." Rourke's face went through several colors before settling on a mottled purple, but he stepped back. Protocol had limits, and even he recognized when those limits had been reached. The next 40 minutes were a masterclass in adaptive medicine. Dr. Klein worked around Eli's presence, adjusting her approaches, modifying her techniques, treating the dog while never fully separating him from his human anchor. Every time she needed to access a new area, Eli would shift the dog tag slightly, letting the metal catch light, letting the scent reinforce the message. Safe, family, home. The ghost remained calm throughout. Not relaxed, not trusting, but calm. His eyes never left Eli's face. His breathing maintained that same steady rhythm. When Dr. Klein needed to examine the problematic rear leg, Eli murmured something too quiet for anyone else to hear, and Ghost allowed the contact without resistance. "Where did you learn this?" Dr. Klein asked during a brief pause. "This isn't standard training." "My father," Eli said simply. He always said that canines don't need to be dominated. They need to be understood. The moment you try to force compliance, you've already lost. Your father sounds like he was exceptional at his job. He was exceptional at everything. Eli's voice carried the weight of a tense that had changed too recently. Except coming home. The treatment continued. Instruments clicked, monitors beeped. Outside, the sun began its slow ascent toward a horizon that didn't care about the small dramas unfolding in sterile rooms. At 05:32 a.m., the door opened again. This time, the energy that entered the room was different. Not aggressive like Rourke, not dismissive like Madsen. This was the energy of absolute authority, the kind that didn't need to announce itself because everyone already knew it was there. Base Commander Colonel Marcus Webb stepped into the trauma bay. He was 63 years old, with silver hair cropped short and a face that had weathered deployments on 4 continents. His uniform bore the accumulated decorations of a career spent in places most maps didn't show, and his eyes carried the particular weight of someone who had ordered men and women into danger, knowing some would not return. Those eyes swept the room, cataloging everything in seconds. The dog, the rookie, the dog tags, the positions of every person present. When they landed on the metal chain still hanging from Eli's fingers, something shifted in Webb's expression. "Those tags," he said quietly. "Read me the name." Eli looked down at the metal he had been holding for nearly an hour. He already knew what was engraved there, had memorized it years ago, traced the letters with his fingers in the darkness of childhood bedrooms, pressed them against his chest on nights when the absence felt unbearable. "Senior Chief Petty Officer Thomas Hart," he read, "United States Navy." Webb's jaw tightened. For a moment, the mask of command slipped, revealing something raw and personal beneath. "Thomas Hart was a man I respected," Webb said slowly. "A man I served with, before our paths diverged. I attended his memorial service 3 months ago." His eyes lifted to meet Eli's. "You're his son." "Yes, sir." "And you're here because I wanted to follow in his footsteps, to understand what he did, why he did it." Eli's voice remained steady, but there was a tremor beneath the surface that threatened to break through. "I didn't expect to find this part of his legacy waiting for me." Ghost shifted against Eli's chest, responding to the emotional current in the room. His nose pressed against the dog tags again, inhaling deeply, and a soft whine emerged from his throat, the first vocalization anyone had heard from him since his arrival. "He recognizes the connection," Dr. Klein said softly. "Dogs process scent memories differently than we do. For Ghost, those tags might carry enough of Senior Chief Hart's signature to create an associative bridge. He's not seeing Eli as a stranger. He's seeing him as an extension of someone he trusted completely." Rourke stepped forward, his earlier aggression replaced by something more calculated. "Sir, with respect, this doesn't change the procedural reality. This young man is a trainee. He has no authorization to serve as a canine handler, and allowing him to maintain contact with a potentially unstable military working dog creates liability issues that—" "Lieutenant Commander," Webb's voice could have frozen fire. "I've just watched a dog who refused all human contact for 6 hours choose to accept treatment because a 22-year-old medic trainee showed up with his dead father's dog tags. You want to talk to me about procedure?" Rourke's mouth opened, then closed. "What's the dog's prognosis?" Webb asked, turning to Dr. Klein. "Physically, he'll recover. The injuries were painful but not life-threatening. Psychologically," she hesitated, "military working dogs who lose their handlers face significant challenges. Many never fully readjust. Some become too unstable for continued service. Ghost's reaction to Hart suggests there might be a pathway to recovery, but it would require consistent contact, specialized training, and time we may not have. And if we separate them now, he'll shut down, completely. We'd be looking at medical retirement at best, behavioral euthanasia at worst." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Webb studied Eli for a long moment, reading something in the young man's face that the others couldn't see. Then he turned to Rourke. "Hart remains with the dog. That's not a request. Sir, the regulations clearly state the regulations were written for normal circumstances. This is not a normal circumstance." Webb's voice hardened. "Thomas Hart spent 15 years protecting this country in ways that will never be declassified. His son walks into my base, and within hours, he's the only thing standing between a decorated canine and complete psychological collapse. You want to tell me that's a coincidence? Sir, I'm not suggesting. You're not suggesting anything, Lieutenant Commander. You're objecting to a decision that's already been made. And if I hear one more word about procedure from you tonight, I'm going to start asking questions about your own performance metrics that you probably don't want answered. Rourke went silent. Webb turned back to Eli. Son, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want an honest answer. Not what you think I want to hear. Not what will get you out of this room fastest. The truth. Yes, sir. After tonight, after this, do you think you could be what Ghost needs? Not for a week, not for a training cycle, for as long as it takes. Eli looked down at the dog pressed against his chest. Ghost's eyes had closed, and his breathing had finally slowed to something approaching normal rest. The tension that had defined his posture since arriving had given way to exhaustion, the bone-deep fatigue of a creature who had been running on adrenaline and trauma for too long. My father made him a promise, Eli said quietly. He promised Ghost would never be abandoned, never be alone. I can't bring my father back. I can't undo whatever happened out there, but I can keep that promise. He paused. If he needs me, I won't walk away. Webb nodded slowly. Dr. Klein, what would it take to formalize this arrangement? Accelerated handler training, behavioral evaluation, supervised integration over a minimum of 30 days. She glanced at Ghost's peaceful form. And we'd need to document everything. If this works, it could change how we approach canine handler transitions across the service. And if it doesn't work, then we've given a grieving dog and a grieving son a chance to heal together. Even if the outcome isn't operational readiness, there's value in that. Webb considered for a moment. Make it happen. I want a preliminary report on my desk in 72 hours. He turned to Rourke. You will provide whatever support Dr. Klein and Hart require. That's not optional. Understood, sir. The words came through gritted teeth. And Rourke? Webb paused at the door. Thomas Hart was a better man than most of us will ever be. His son walked in here tonight and did something you and your entire team couldn't accomplish in 6 hours. Maybe instead of looking for reasons to obstruct, you should be looking for lessons to learn. He left without waiting for a response. The room seemed to exhale. Well, Madsen said after a long silence, I guess we're doing this then. We're doing this, Dr. Klein confirmed. Hart, I'm going to need you to maintain contact while we transfer Ghost to a recovery suite. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am. Good. And Hart? Ma'am? Whatever your father taught you, keep using it, because right now you're the only person in this facility that dogs trust, and that makes you the most valuable asset we have. The transfer happened slowly, carefully, with Eli maintaining physical and verbal contact at every step. Ghost followed him without resistance, moving as if connected by an invisible tether that pulled him wherever Eli went. By the time they reached the recovery suite, a quieter space away from the trauma bay's harsh lights and constant activity, the first rays of dawn were filtering through reinforced windows. Dr. Klein finished her final checks and stepped back. He needs rest, real rest, probably 12 to 14 hours before he'll be ready for any kind of assessment. And Hart? Rourke asked, still lingering near the door like a persistent shadow. Hart stays. If he moves, Ghost will react. We've established that clearly enough. So the rookie gets to sleep while... The rookie doesn't get to sleep, Eli interrupted quietly. He was already settling onto the floor beside Ghost's recovery bed, his back against the wall, the dog tags wrapped around his fingers. I'll be here, whatever he needs. Rourke's expression flickered between contempt and something that might have been grudging respect. Fine. But when this goes sideways, and it will go sideways, I want it on record that I objected. Noted, Dr. Klein said dryly. Now, get out. Both of you. This dog needs quiet, and you're the loudest thing in the building. They left. The door closed. And in the sudden silence, Eli finally allowed himself to feel the weight of everything that had happened. Ghost's breathing had settled into a slow, rhythmic pattern. His body was curled toward Eli, close enough that their warmth mingled in the cool air of the recovery suite. Every few minutes, his nose would twitch toward the dog tags, confirming they were still there, confirming the connection hadn't broken. I don't know if you understand any of this, Eli whispered. I don't know if dogs grieve the way humans do, or if you're just running on instinct and association. But my father loved you. He talked about you in every letter, every call. Ghost is the best partner I've ever had. Ghost saved my life again today. When this is over, I'm bringing Ghost home, and you're going to meet the smartest, bravest dog on the planet." Ghost's eyes opened slightly at the sound of Eli's voice. "He didn't make it home. I don't know why. They don't tell us why. They just tell us that it happened and that we're supposed to find a way to keep living." Eli's voice cracked slightly, but he kept talking. "But you made it. You're here. And if that's not my father's way of sending me a message, I don't know what is." The dog's paw moved, pressing against Eli's leg. It wasn't a command or a trained behavior. It was simple contact, the need to touch and be touched, to confirm that the other living creature in the room was real and present and not about to disappear. "Okay," Eli said softly. "We'll figure this out together, one step at a time." Outside, the base was waking up, vehicles moving, voices carrying, the machinery of military life grinding forward regardless of what dramas played out in quiet rooms. But inside the recovery suite, time had slowed to the rhythm of two heartbeats gradually synchronizing, human and canine, grief and hope, past and future meeting in the uncertain present. Eli's head dropped back against the wall. He was exhausted, but he didn't close his eyes. Every time Ghost shifted, every time the dog's breathing changed, even slightly, Eli's attention snapped back to full alertness. It was the same hypervigilance his father had described in letters, the constant awareness that came from being responsible for another life. "He said you were stubborn," Eli murmured. "Said you once refused to leave a position for 18 hours because you'd found a scent and wouldn't give up on it. The whole team wanted to move, but you just sat there, ignoring orders until they finally dug where you'd been pointing and found what they were looking for." Ghost's ears rotated toward the voice. "He said that's what made you special. Not the training, not the equipment, not any of the tactical stuff. It was the fact that you knew when you were right, and you wouldn't let anyone convince you otherwise." Eli's hand found the spot behind Ghost's ear that dogs universally seemed to appreciate. "He said you reminded him of my mother. That's the highest compliment he knew how to give." The morning light grew stronger, painting golden stripes across the floor. Equipment beeped softly in the background. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang and was answered. Life continued. But in this room, something had shifted. Something that couldn't be measured or documented or fit into any procedural framework. A grieving dog had reached for a stranger and found something familiar. A young man carrying his father's legacy had discovered a way to make it real. The questions would come later. The evaluations, the training, the endless assessments that military bureaucracy required. There would be challenges and setbacks and moments when it seemed impossible that any of this could work. But for now, in the quiet of a recovery suite filled with morning light, a dog who had refused the entire world had finally found a reason to try again. And the rookie who had walked in with nothing but a pair of dog tags had become something far more important than anyone had expected. A bridge between what was lost and what might still be saved. Ghost's eyes closed again, his breathing deep and even. Eli watched him sleep, one hand resting on warm fur, the other wrapped around metal that still carried echoes of a voice that would never speak again. "I'll carry it," Eli whispered to the empty room. "Whatever you need, however long it takes." Outside, the sun continued its climb, indifferent to the small miracles unfolding below. But somewhere between dawn and whatever came next, a promise had been renewed, not spoken aloud, not written down, but understood in the only way that mattered. The dog tags caught the light one final time, and Ghost's paw pressed more firmly against Eli's leg, and the silence between them became something else entirely. It was the beginning. The hours that followed existed in a strange suspension between crisis and calm. Eli didn't sleep. Every time his eyelids grew heavy, Ghost would shift position or release a small sound, and Eli's attention would snap back to full alertness. It was exhausting in a way that transcended physical fatigue, the constant vigilance of being someone's only anchor in a world that had stopped making sense. Dr. Klein returned at 09:15 a.m. with a clipboard and an expression that suggested she'd been awake nearly as long as Eli had. "How is he?" "Sleeping. Actually sleeping?" Eli's voice was rough from hours of quiet talking. "He woke up twice, checked that I was still here, then went back under." "That's remarkable progress." She crouched beside them, studying Ghost's relaxed sister. "Most canines in this situation cycle through hypervigilance for days. He's already entered recovery sleep patterns. Is that good? It's unprecedented." She made a note on her clipboard. "Heart. I need to ask you something, and I need you to understand why I'm asking. Go ahead. Where did you learn to do this? And I don't mean the general concept, I mean the specific techniques. The way you positioned yourself in his peripheral vision. The way you use the sound of the tags as a Pavlovian anchor. The timing of your vocalizations. That's not intuition. That's training. Eli was quiet for a moment, his hand still resting on Ghost's shoulder. My father used to send me videos. Not the classified stuff, just training sessions, behavioral exercises. He'd narrate them like he was teaching me, even though I was 12 years old and had no idea what half the terminology meant. A small smile crossed his face. He said that someday, when I was old enough, he'd explain everything properly, that we'd work with dogs together. But he never got that chance. No. The smile faded. He didn't. Dr. Klein nodded slowly. Your father said, and this is in his handler notes, which I pulled this morning, that Ghost responds to respect more than commands. That the moment you try to assert dominance, you've lost his trust. He wrote that Ghost needed to choose his handler, not the other way around. That sounds like him. It sounds like you understood that instinctively. She stood, tucking the clipboard under her arm. I'm recommending you for accelerated handler certification. It's going to be intensive, 30 days of compressed training that normally takes 6 months. And at the end, there's going to be an evaluation that determines whether you were qualified to serve as Ghost's permanent handler. Eli looked up at her. And if I fail? Then Ghost gets reassigned to someone else, someone with proper credentials. Her expression softened slightly. But I don't think you're going to fail, Hart. I think your father spent years preparing you for exactly this moment, even if neither of you knew it at the time. The door opened before Eli could respond. Lieutenant Commander Rourke stood in the threshold, his face a mask of barely contained frustration. Behind him, Chief Madsen hovered like a shadow. The inspection team is here, Rourke announced. They want to see the dog, and they want to understand why a trainee with 0 handler qualifications is currently serving as primary contact for a high-value military asset. He's not just serving as primary contact, Dr. Klein said evenly. He's the only reason that asset is still viable. That's your professional opinion? That's documented fact. I have 6 hours of behavioral observations that show Ghost responding exclusively to Hart's presence. You want to explain to the inspection team why you're recommending we disrupt the only successful intervention we've achieved. Rourke's jaw tightened, but he stepped aside. They're in the conference room. Bring the dog. The transfer required careful choreography. Eli stood first, moving slowly enough that Ghost could track every motion. The dog's eyes opened, alert but not alarmed, watching as Eli extended his hand with the tags visible. We need to move, Eli said quietly. I'll be with you the whole time. Nothing changes. Ghost studied him for 3 heartbeats. Then he rose, shaking off sleep, and positioned himself at Eli's left side, the traditional handler position, as if muscle memory had overridden everything else. They walked through corridors that seemed to hold their breath as they passed. Personnel flattened against walls, conversations died mid-sentence, and eyes tracked the unlikely pair with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright disbelief. The story had already spread through the base grapevine. The feral K9, the rookie medic, the dead handler's dog tags. The conference room was too bright and too crowded. 3 members of the inspection team sat at one end of a long table, their uniforms bearing insignia that marked them as specialists in military working dog operations. Rourke and Madsen had positioned themselves near the door, and Dr. Klein took a seat beside the inspectors with her documentation ready. Ghost's posture tightened the moment they entered. Too many strangers, too many eyes. The room reeked of authority and judgment, and Eli could feel the dog's muscles coiling beneath his hand. Easy, Eli murmured. I'm right here. The lead inspector, a severe woman with colonel's eagles on her shoulders, studied them with clinical detachment. This is the K9 in question? This is Ghost, Dr. Klein confirmed. Tactical designation MWD 7749. Decorated veteran of multiple deployments, currently in behavioral recovery following the loss of his handler. And this is the trainee who established rapport? Eli Hart, medic trainee, son of Ghost's previous handler, Senior Chief Thomas Hart. Something flickered across the colonel's face. Thomas Hart. You knew him? Eli asked before he could stop himself. I knew of him, the The colonel's voice carried a weight that suggested volumes left unspoken. His reputation preceded him considerably. She gestured to a chair. "Sit, both of you." Eli lowered himself into the indicated seat, and Ghost immediately pressed against his leg, maintaining contact. The inspectors exchanged glances. "Tell me about the intervention," the colonel said, "from the beginning." Eli recounted the events of the previous night, the chaos in the trauma bay, Ghost's complete shutdown, the moment when the dog tags had changed everything. He kept his voice level and clinical, avoiding the emotional undercurrents that still threatened to overwhelm him when he thought too carefully about what had happened. When he finished, the colonel leaned forward. "You said your father taught you these techniques. Can you be more specific?" He called it the language of respect. Eli's hand moved unconsciously to the tags around his fingers. He said that military dogs aren't machines. They are partners with their own psychology, their own needs, their own ways of processing trauma. The handler's job isn't to control, it's to communicate, to build a relationship where trust flows both ways. And he specifically prepared you for a scenario where Ghost might lose his handler? The question hit harder than Eli expected. He took a breath before answering. "He told me once, this was about 2 years ago, during a video call, that if anything ever happened to him, Ghost would need someone who understood. Someone who could remind him that the world hadn't ended, even if it felt that way." Eli's voice caught slightly. "I thought he was being dramatic. I didn't realize he was giving me instructions." Silence settled over the room. The colonel turned to Dr. Klein. "Your professional assessment?" Ghost has demonstrated consistent positive response to Hart's presence and complete rejection of all other handlers. The behavioral markers suggest a transference bond. Essentially, Ghost is processing Hart as an extension of his previous handler based on scent association, voice patterns, and the physical presence of the dog tags. She consulted her notes. "It's extremely rare, but it's real, and it's the only pathway to recovery I can identify." "Lieutenant Commander Rourke, your objections?" Rourke straightened. "With respect, ma'am, this sets a dangerous precedent. Allowing an unqualified trainee to serve as primary handler for a military working dog, regardless of circumstances, undermines the entire certification system. If we make exceptions here, we invite exceptions everywhere." "And your proposed alternative? Standard protocol: sedate the dog, transfer him to a specialized rehabilitation facility, assign a qualified handler team to attempt behavioral modification over the standard timeline. Which would take how long? 6 months minimum, potentially longer. And the success rate for that approach with canines who've experienced handler loss?" Rourke hesitated. 37% return to active service, but... "So, you're proposing we take a dog who is currently responding to intervention," the colonel interrupted, "remove him from the only human he trusts, transport him to an unfamiliar facility, and subject him to a 6-month process with a failure rate above 60%. Is that your professional recommendation? I'm recommending we follow established procedures. Procedures exist to serve outcomes, Lieutenant Commander, not the other way around." The colonel turned back to Eli. "Hart, I'm going to ask you directly. Are you prepared to commit to this animal's recovery? Not for 30 days, for as long as it takes, potentially years." Eli met her gaze without flinching. "Yes, ma'am. Even if it means your training timeline gets disrupted, even if it affects your career progression. My father gave 15 years to the Navy. He died serving his country in ways I'll probably never fully understand. The least I can do is take care of his partner." The colonel studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Dr. Klein, you mentioned accelerated handler certification. I'm authorizing it. Hart will complete the compressed 30-day program under your supervision, with Ghost as his training partner. At the end of that period, we'll conduct a full evaluation. If he passes, he receives provisional handler status. If he fails, we reassess. And the standard protocols," Rourke started, "are waived for the duration of this evaluation. Consider it a pilot program." The colonel gathered her materials. "Thomas Hart was one of the finest handlers this program ever produced. If his son inherited even a fraction of that capability, we'd be fools not to explore it." She stood, and the other inspectors followed. "You have 30 days, Hart. Don't waste them." They left. Rourke's expression could have curdled milk, but he said nothing. Madsen had already disappeared, probably to spread the news that the inspection hadn't gone according to his commanding officer's wishes. Dr. Klein touched Eli's shoulder as she passed. "Get some rest. The training starts tomorrow, and it won't be easy. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when it's over and you're still standing. She left, and suddenly the conference room held only Eli, Ghost, and Rourke. The lieutenant commander stood by the door, blocking the exit without explicitly refusing to move. His face had settled into something harder than mere frustration, a kind of calculating hostility that suggested this battle was far from over. You know what I think? Rourke's voice was quiet enough that it wouldn't carry beyond the room. I think you walked in here with a sob story and a pair of dog tags, and everyone fell for it. The grieving son, the broken dog, the miracle connection. It's a great narrative. Eli said nothing. But narratives don't survive contact with reality. You're not a handler. You're not trained. You're just a kid who got lucky one night, and when the luck runs out, and it will run out, that dog is going to be worse off than if we'd handled this properly from the beginning. Ghost's posture had shifted slightly, responding to the tension in Rourke's voice. Eli's hand moved automatically to the dog's shoulder, steadying him. You're wrong about one thing, Eli said quietly. Just one? This isn't luck. Luck doesn't explain how I knew to position myself in his peripheral vision. Luck doesn't explain how I knew to use the tags as an auditory anchor. Luck doesn't explain any of the techniques I used last night. Eli stood, keeping Ghost close. My father trained me for this. Maybe not explicitly, maybe not intentionally, but every video he sent, every technique he described, every principle he tried to teach me, it all led here, to this moment, to this dog. He moved toward the door, and Rourke was forced to step aside or create a physical confrontation. 30 days, Eli said as he passed. That's all I'm asking for. If I fail, you can say you told everyone so, but if I succeed, he paused at the threshold. Maybe you'll learn something about what real partnership looks like. He left before Rourke could respond. The next 2 weeks became a blur of training, evaluation, and exhaustion. Dr. Klein hadn't exaggerated the intensity. The accelerated handler program packed 6 months of learning into 30 days, which meant Eli was absorbing information almost faster than his brain could process it. Canine behavioral psychology, tactical communication protocols, emergency medical procedures for working dogs, the history and evolution of military canine programs. And through it all, Ghost remained at his side, learning alongside him, recovering alongside him, rebuilding trust in a world that had tried to break both of them. The progress wasn't linear. There were setbacks. On day 4, a maintenance vehicle backfired near the training facility, and Ghost's reaction was immediate and severe. The dog dropped into a defensive crouch, every muscle locked, his breathing accelerating to dangerous levels. For 18 seconds, Eli couldn't reach him. Ghost was trapped somewhere in his own mind, reliving sounds that Eli could only imagine. Then Eli pulled out the dog tags. He didn't wave them or make a show. He simply held them in his palm, letting the light catch the metal, and said the words his father had repeated in video after video. Look at me. Same sound. Same promise. Ghost's eyes found the tags. His breathing slowed. The defensive posture relaxed by degrees until he was pressing against Eli's leg again, seeking contact and reassurance. Klein had watched the entire episode without intervening. When it was over, she made a note on her clipboard and said only, "That's what I was looking for." On day 8, MP Hayes found Eli during a break between training sessions. The same Hayes who had delivered Ghost to the trauma bay that first night. He carried an envelope in his hand, and his expression suggested he had been debating whether to approach for some time. Hart, got a minute? Sure. Hayes glanced around, confirming they were relatively private, then extended the envelope. This was in your father's personal effects. The processing team didn't know what to do with it because it wasn't addressed to next of kin. Just had a first name on it. E. Eli took the envelope. His hand shook slightly as he recognized his father's handwriting. Nobody opened it, Hayes continued. Figured that was your call. Thank you. Hayes nodded once and left. Eli waited until evening to open it. He was alone in the quarters they'd assigned him. Ghost curled on a bed nearby, both of them too tired for anything except stillness. The envelope was standard military issue, slightly worn from transport, bearing a single letter in faded ink. Inside was a single sheet of paper. E. If you're reading this, something happened that I always promised myself wouldn't. I'm sorry. Not for the choices I made, but for leaving you to make sense of them without me there to explain. Ghost is the best partner I've ever had. Not because of his training or his capabilities, because he taught me what trust actually looks like. He doesn't care about rank or reputation. He cares about consistency, about being present, about following through on the small promises that most people forget they made. If Ghost survives and I don't, he's going to need someone who understands that, someone who can remind him that the world didn't end, even when it felt like it did. I've been trying to teach you how to be that person without ever saying it directly. Maybe that was wrong. Maybe I should have been clearer, but here's the thing about Ghost. He already knows you. Every video I sent, every story I told, every time I mentioned your name, he was listening. Dogs remember. They remember voices and scents and the emotional context of every conversation they have witnessed. He knows that you matter to me, and when you meet him, if you meet him, he'll recognize something familiar in you, even if he can't explain it to himself. Don't let him feel abandoned. Don't let him think I broke my promise. You're going to do great things, E. You always were. Dad. Eli read the letter 3 times before the words stopped blurring. Ghost had lifted his head from the bed, watching with the patient attention of a creature who recognized grief even if he couldn't name it. When Eli finally set the letter aside, the dog rose and crossed the room, pressing his body against Eli's legs in the same gesture of comfort he'd offered 1,000 times before, only now directed at someone new. He knew, Eli whispered. He knew this would happen. Somehow, he knew. Ghost's nose touched the hand that still held the envelope, inhaling the familiar scent that lingered on the paper. Then he exhaled slowly and leaned harder against Eli's weight. The message was clear. They were in this together now. Whatever came next, they would face it as partners. On day 15, Commander Webb summoned Eli to his office. The space was exactly what Eli expected, decorated with the accumulated artifacts of a long career, walls covered with photos and certificates, a desk that had witnessed decades of decisions. Webb gestured to a chair and waited until Eli was seated before speaking. Dr. Klein tells me your training is progressing ahead of schedule. Ghost's behavioral metrics are improving faster than anyone anticipated. You're on track to pass the certification evaluation with room to spare. Thank you, sir. I didn't call you here for congratulations. Webb leaned forward, studying Eli with the intensity of someone trying to read something beneath the surface. I called you here because we've received a request. Ghost's original unit wants him returned to operational status as soon as he's cleared. They're short on K9 assets, and his record makes him too valuable to keep sidelined. Eli's stomach tightened. Sir, with respect, let me finish. Webb raised a hand. I've pushed back on the request. Told them Ghost isn't ready, that rushing his recovery could result in permanent behavioral damage, that the cost of losing him entirely outweighs the benefit of rushing him back to service. Thank you, sir. I bought you time, Hart. Not indefinitely. The pressure will continue, and eventually, someone higher than me is going to insist. But for now, you have space to complete the training and solidify the bond. Webb paused. There's something else. Sir? Tomorrow morning, there's a memorial service. Internal, small, just the people who served with your father and those of us who worked with him over the years. I'd like you to attend, and I'd like you to bring Ghost. Eli's throat constricted. Sir, I'm not sure if... I'm not asking you to speak or make a scene. I'm asking you to be present, to let Ghost be present. Webb's voice softened slightly. Military working dogs experience loss in ways we don't fully understand. Some units have started incorporating them into memorial ceremonies, letting them witness the rituals of closure that we use to process grief. The theory is that it helps them understand that their handler isn't coming back, that the absence is permanent, that it's safe to form new attachments. You think Ghost needs that? I think you both do. The memorial service took place at 0700 in a chapel that smelled of polish and history. The attendance was small, perhaps 30 people, all of them bearing the weathered expressions of individuals who had spent too much time in places most maps didn't show. They sat in clusters, speaking in low voices about a man who had clearly left marks on all of them. Eli entered through a side door, with Ghost at his side. The dog's posture was alert but not aggressive, scanning the room with the professional vigilance of a creature trained to identify threats in any environment. When they took their place in the back row, several heads turned, not with hostility but with curiosity. Word had spread. The ceremony was brief. Commander Webb spoke about service and sacrifice, about the cost of protecting ideals that most people took for granted. A chaplain offered words of comfort. And then, one by one, people who had known Thomas Hart rose to share memories that painted a portrait of a man who had been exceptional at everything except coming home. Tom never let anyone feel invisible, one operator said. Even in the worst situations, he found ways to remind us that we mattered, that what we were doing meant something. He talked about his kid constantly, another added, glancing toward Eli, said you were going to be better than he ever was, said you had the heart for this work, even if you didn't know it yet. And Ghost, a woman with the bearing of someone who had commanded difficult operations, stepped forward. Ghost was everything to Tom. He used to say that Dog understood him better than any human ever could, that when everything else got complicated, Ghost kept him grounded. Ghost's ears rotated toward each speaker, tracking voices, processing tones. When the woman mentioned his name, his head lifted slightly, recognition, maybe, or memory, triggered by context. The service ended with a moment of silence, and the playing of a recording that made Eli's chest tighten. His father's voice, captured during some routine briefing, speaking about duty and partnership, and the bonds that form when lives depend on absolute trust. Ghost went completely still, his entire body oriented toward the speakers, ears forward, breathing suspended. For perhaps 10 seconds he stood frozen, processing, remembering, reconciling the voice he knew with the permanent absence it now represented. Then he exhaled, a long, slow release that seemed to carry weight beyond mere breath. And he pressed closer to Eli's leg, not seeking comfort, but offering it, a gesture that said, as clearly as any words could, "I understand now. We move forward together." The final evaluation came on day 29. The testing facility had been configured with obstacles, distractions, and challenges designed to assess every aspect of handler-canine partnership. Eli and Ghost would need to demonstrate communication, coordination, stress response, and, most critically, the ability to function as a unit under unpredictable conditions. Dr. Klein stood with the evaluation panel, her expression carefully neutral. Commander Webb had positioned himself where he could observe without interfering. And Rourke was there, of course, watching with the barely concealed hope of someone waiting for a predicted failure to finally materialize. The first exercises went smoothly. Navigation drills, communication tests, tactical positioning scenarios. Ghost responded to Eli's commands with precision that exceeded the baseline standards, and Eli read the dog's body language with an accuracy that surprised even the evaluators. Then came the stress tests. A door slammed somewhere in the facility. Ghost's posture tightened, muscles coiling, as trauma responses threatened to override training. But before the reaction could escalate, Eli was already there, hand on shoulder, voice steady, tags visible in peripheral vision. "Look at me. Same sound, same promise." Ghost's attention locked onto Eli. The tension drained by degrees. Within 30 seconds, he was ready to continue. The evaluators made notes. The final test was the one that mattered most. "Hart," Dr. Klein stepped forward. "For this exercise, you're going to do something that goes against every instinct you've developed over the past month. You're going to transfer Ghost's attention to me." Eli's heart rate spiked. "What?" If Ghost is going to be an effective military working dog, he needs to accept handling from multiple qualified personnel. Not just you. That's the difference between a service animal and a pet. She held out her hand. "Give me the dog tags." For a moment, Eli couldn't move. The tags had been his constant companion for nearly a month, the physical symbol of everything he'd inherited and everything he'd promised. Giving them to someone else felt like betrayal. But Dr. Klein's eyes held steady. And somewhere beneath the panic, Eli understood what she was really asking. Not for him to abandon Ghost, but to demonstrate that the trust they'd built could extend beyond a single point of failure. He unclipped the tags from his belt loop. Ghost watched the movement with intense focus, his entire body oriented toward the metal that had defined his world since that first night in the trauma bay. When Eli extended the tags toward Dr. Klein, the dog's ears flattened slightly. Not aggression, but uncertainty. "Ghost." Eli waited until the dog's eyes met his. "If you trust me, trust who I choose." The words hung in the air. Then Eli placed the tags in Dr. Klein's palm. Ghost's reaction was immediate. His gaze snapped to the vet, tracking the tags as they moved from one hand to another. Every muscle in his body had tensed. Eli could see the internal struggle, the instinct to reject, to retreat, to protect the one symbol of safety in a world that had already taken too much. "Ghost." Dr. Klein's voice was calm, professional, exactly the tone she'd been trained to use. "I'm not taking anything from you. I'm adding to what you have." She crouched slowly, bringing herself to the dog's level. The tags dangled from her fingers, catching light, making that small metallic sound that Ghost had learned to associate with security. 1 second passed, 2. Ghost stepped forward, not rushing, not fleeing, stepping forward with the deliberate care of a creature making a decision it hadn't thought possible. His nose touched Dr. Klein's hand, inhaling the scent of metal and memory. Then he looked back at Eli, as if seeking confirmation that this was allowed. Eli nodded once. Ghost turned back to Dr. Klein and sat. The position was formal, structured, the same tactical alert position he'd held 1,000 times for his previous handler, but now he was holding it for someone new, someone he had chosen to accept because the person he trusted had asked him to. "Contact," Dr. Klein said quietly, and reached forward to touch Ghost's shoulder. The dog didn't flinch, didn't tense, didn't react with the defensive posture that had defined him for weeks. He simply sat there, accepting the touch, maintaining his position, demonstrating with perfect clarity that he was capable of partnership beyond a single human. Dr. Klein held the contact for precisely 2 seconds, long enough to document, short enough not to push limits, then returned the tags to Eli. "Assessment complete," she said, standing and turning to the evaluation panel. "Handler certification, passed. Partnership viability, confirmed. Recommendation, provisional handler status with full review in 6 months. The room erupted into professional applause. Eli dropped it to one knee beside Ghost, wrapping his arms around the dog's neck in a gesture that had nothing to do with military protocol and everything to do with the bond they'd built through 30 days of shared struggle. "You did it," he whispered. "We did it." Ghost's tail moved. Not a full wag, not yet, but movement. Life. The first clear sign that something other than survival instinct had started to return. Rourke approached as Eli stood. His expression had shifted from anticipation of failure to something more complicated, the reluctant acknowledgement of someone who had been definitively proven wrong. "Heart." He extended his hand. "I owe you an apology." Eli looked at the hand, then at the face above it. "Sir, I saw you as a problem, an obstacle to proper procedure. I didn't consider that maybe..." Rourke's jaw tightened. "Maybe proper procedure isn't always the right answer. Maybe sometimes you have to trust what's actually working instead of what's supposed to work." Eli shook the hand. "Ghost doesn't need authority, sir. He needs consistency. That's all any of us need, really. You sound like your father. I'll take that as a compliment." It was meant as one. The ceremony happened 2 days later. Commander Webb had offered something more formal: flags, presentations, the full military recognition that Eli's accomplishment technically warranted. Eli had declined. He didn't want a spectacle. He didn't need validation from structures that had once dismissed him. What he needed was closure. So, they gathered in a small room: Dr. Klein, Webb, MP Hayes, and a handful of personnel who had been involved in Ghost's recovery. No cameras, no speeches, just a quiet acknowledgement of what had been achieved and what it meant for the future. Webb presented Eli with his handler certification, a simple document that represented 30 days of intensive training and years of preparation he hadn't recognized for what it was. Dr. Klein provided the official behavioral assessment showing Ghost's remarkable progress, and Hayes offered something unexpected: a new tag to add to Ghost's collar. "It's standard issue," Hayes explained. "Nothing fancy. Just figured the collar should have more than one name on it now." The tag read simply, "Heart, not Eli." Not a rank or designation, just the family name that connected 3 generations of service: grandfather, father, son, to a dog who had somehow become part of that lineage. Eli clipped the tag onto Ghost's collar beside the attachment point where his father's dog tags had once hung. The metal clinked softly, and Ghost's ears rotated toward the sound. Recognition, maybe, or acknowledgement. "He refused the whole world," Webb said quietly, "until you showed him home." The words carried weight that transcended the moment. Home wasn't a place. It wasn't even a person. It was a choice. The decision to trust again after trust had been shattered. to accept connection and after connection had been severed, to believe in the possibility of forward motion when everything seemed frozen in grief. Ghost had made that choice, and in making it, he had given Eli permission to make the same one. Later that night, they walked together across the base. The air was cool, carrying the salt edge of distant ocean and the mechanical hum of a military installation that never fully slept. Eli moved without particular destination, letting his feet find their own path while Ghost paced beside him in the easy rhythm they'd developed over weeks of partnership. They reached the main gate, the one that led off base toward the civilian world that continued its existence regardless of what happened within these walls. Ghost stopped at the threshold, his body suddenly rigid. Eli watched him carefully. The gate represented something complex for both of them: passage, possibility, the acknowledgement that life existed beyond the crisis that had defined the past month. For Ghost, it might also carry memories, entries and exits, departures and returns, the specific geography of a loss that would never fully heal. "Hey," Eli crouched beside him, pulling out the dog tags that he now wore around his own neck. "Look at me." Ghost's eyes found the metal. "This doesn't change because we walk through a gate. It doesn't change because we leave this place. Wherever we go." Eli touched his chest, where the tags rested against his heart. "This comes with us. I come with us." Ghost studied the tags for a long moment. Then he looked at the gate, then back at Eli, and he stepped forward, one paw across the threshold, then another. Then his whole body, moving through the boundary with the deliberate courage of a creature confronting something that had once seemed impossible. Eli followed. They stood together on the other side, not far, just a few feet past the checkpoint, breathing the same air, occupying the same space, proving that forward motion was possible, even when everything inside screamed to stay frozen in place. "We'll do this tomorrow too," Eli said quietly, "and the day after, and the day after that, until it doesn't feel like crossing enemy lines anymore." Ghost's tail moved again, that same small, tentative motion from the evaluation room. Not joy yet, not quite, but the promise of joy. The possibility that somewhere on the other side of grief, something other than survival might be waiting. They turned back toward the base. The walk home was quiet, unhurried, marked by the kind of comfortable silence that only exists between individuals who have passed through difficulty together and emerged with their connection intact. Morning arrived with unexpected news. Eli was summoned to Commander Webb's office at 0730, Ghost accompanying him as he now did everywhere. The room held the same artifacts and decorations, but Webb's expression carried something new, a mixture of resolution and something that might have been satisfaction. "Hart, sit down." Eli sat. Ghost positioned himself beside the chair, alert but relaxed. "I received a message this morning. It concerns your father." Webb slid a folder across the desk. "This is everything I'm authorized to share with you. It's not complete. Some of what he did will remain classified indefinitely, but it's more than we usually release to next of kin." Eli opened the folder. The pages contained fragments, mission summaries with key details redacted, commendations for actions described only in general terms, photographs from distant locations, faces blurred except for his father's. And at the very end, a formal acknowledgement that Senior Chief Thomas Hart had received multiple classified decorations for service above and beyond the call of duty. "He was one of the best we ever produced," Webb said quietly, "not just as a handler, as an operator, as a leader, as someone who understood that the mission was never just the mission, it was the people you served with and the principles you were fighting for." Eli closed the folder. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because you earned the right to know." Webb leaned back. "Everything you've accomplished this month, the training, the bond with Ghost, the way you handled every obstacle we threw at you, it wasn't luck. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a capability, the same capability your father had, running through you like it was written in your genes. I'm not trying to be him. I know. That's what makes you exceptional." Webb stood, moving to the window. "Your father spent his career trying to protect people. Sometimes that meant dangerous missions. Sometimes it meant impossible choices. But he never lost sight of why he was doing it, and neither have you." He turned back to face Eli. "Ghost doesn't just need a handler. He needs a partner who understands what he's been through, who can remind him that the loss doesn't define him, who can help him find purpose again." His voice softened. "You're that person. Your father made sure of it, even if he couldn't be here to see it happen." Eli nodded slowly, processing the weight of everything he'd learned, not just about his father, but about himself. The videos his father had sent weren't casual entertainment. They were curriculum. The stories and principles weren't parental advice. They were training materials disguised as love. Thomas Hart had been preparing his son for exactly this possibility. And now, standing in the commander's office with Ghost pressed against his leg, Eli understood the magnitude of that preparation. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me. Thank your father, and keep proving him right." The months that followed were a gradual transformation. Ghost's progress wasn't dramatic. It was incremental. Small victories accumulating into something larger, moments of trust building into patterns of partnership. The dog who had refused the entire world learned to accept a widening circle of people, each new connection anchored by the unshakable foundation of his bond with Eli. He accepted Dr. Klein's medical examinations without resistance. He tolerated MP Hayes' presence during training exercises. He even allowed Rourke to approach, though he never quite relaxed around the lieutenant commander. Some instincts, apparently, were too accurate to override entirely. The training intensified as Ghost's recovery solidified. Tactical exercises, deployment simulations, the complex choreography of military working dog operations that transformed two individuals into a single devastating unit. Eli learned to read Ghost's signals with precision that surpassed the baseline standards, and Ghost learned to trust Eli's judgment with the same absolute faith he had once reserved for a man who was never coming back. On day 93, they were cleared for operational status. The certification ceremony was larger than the Handler presentation had been. More attendees, more formality, more acknowledgement that something unusual had been accomplished. But Eli barely noticed the crowd. His attention was fixed on Ghost, who sat beside him in perfect tactical alert position, wearing a collar that now bore 3 tags: the original military identification, Eli's family name, and, added just that morning, his father's dog tags, finally returned to the place they belonged. "You're not just a team now," Dr. Klein said as she presented the operational certification. "You're an example, proof that trauma doesn't have to be permanent, that loss doesn't have to be the end of the story." Eli accepted the documentation and looked down at Ghost. The dog's tail was moving, not the small, tentative motion of early recovery, but a genuine wag, joy, anticipation, the expression of an animal who had found his purpose again. "He doesn't need force," Eli said quietly, echoing words that had become a kind of personal mantra. "He needs family." Ghost's eyes met his, and in that gaze Eli saw everything. The grief they'd shared, the growth they'd earned, the future they would build together. His father had made a promise, and Eli had kept it. The dog who had been alone was surrounded by connections. The rookie who had been dismissed was standing as a certified handler. The loss that had seemed permanent had become something different, not healed, never fully healed, but transformed, carried forward, given meaning through the very bonds it had threatened to destroy. That night, Eli sat alone in his quarters with Ghost sleeping nearby. The dog's breathing was deep and even, the untroubled rest of a creature who finally felt safe in the world again. The tags on his collar caught moonlight from the window, creating small reflections on the ceiling. Eli pulled out the letter his father had sent, the one he'd read a dozen times since Hayes had delivered it. The words hadn't changed, but their meaning had deepened with every rereading. "Don't let him feel abandoned. Don't let him think I broke my promise." "I kept it," Eli said to the empty room. "I kept all of it." He folded the letter and tucked it away. Then he removed his father's dog tags from around his neck and held them in his palm, feeling the weight of metal and memory. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, operational missions, tactical deployments, the complex, demanding work of a military working dog team operating at the highest level. The pressure would be immense, the stakes would be real, and somewhere in the chaos, there would be moments when the grief threatened to resurface, when the absence of his father hit with the same devastating force it had carried in those first terrible days. But Ghost would be there, the same Ghost who had refused the entire world until a rookie showed up with a pair of dog tags and a promise he didn't even know he'd been trained to keep. The same Ghost who had taught Eli what partnership actually meant. Not command and compliance, but trust and reciprocity. The same Ghost who had become, against all expectations, exactly what they both needed. Eli draped the dog tags over Ghost's collar, adding them to the collection of metal that now defined the dog's identity. His father's, his own, the original military designation, 3 generations of connection hanging together like a family crest. Ghost stirred slightly, nose twitching toward the new weight. Then he settled again, pressing closer to Eli's leg, and returned to sleep. Outside, the base continued its eternal operations. Vehicles moving, lights patrolling, the machinery of military readiness grinding forward through another night. But inside this room, something had been completed. A circle closed, a promise fulfilled, a bond forged from grief and determination, and the stubborn refusal to let loss have the final word. The dog who had refused treatment had found a reason to accept it. The rookie who had been mocked had proven everyone wrong, and the father who couldn't come home had sent in his place everything his son would need to carry on. Eli's eyes closed. Sleep came easily now, the gift of purpose, the reward of work that mattered, the peace of knowing that tomorrow would bring the opportunity to do it all again. Ghost's breathing remained steady beside him, constant, reliable, alive. They had found each other in the darkness, and in finding each other, they had found themselves. The promise was kept. The family was whole, and somewhere, in whatever dimension, holds the spirits of those who gave everything they had. Senior Chief Thomas Hart could finally rest, knowing that his partner and his son had become partners themselves, carrying forward everything he had built through the simple, powerful act of refusing to let love die. The morning would come, the missions would follow, the future would unfold in ways neither of them could predict. But they would face it together. That was the promise. That was the legacy. That was the truth that Ghost had recognized in a pair of dog tags and a voice that carried echoes of the man he had lost. Family doesn't end with death. It transforms. It transfers. It finds new vessels and new expressions. It survives. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, where duty meets devotion, and the bonds we form become stronger than the losses that threaten to break them.